5 American wars, 5 family empires, 1 pattern. Not rumor, not conspiracy boards, public contracts, balance sheets, annual reports. There is a business model in American history more reliable than oil, more predictable than banking, and more protected than any monopoly law ever written. Turn war into recurring revenue. Generation after generation, the same surnames appear whenever America mobilizes. DuPont, explosives and chemicals. Rockefeller, oil and fuel. Morgan, war finance. Lockheed, Lockheed Martin, aircraft and weapons. Halliburton, logistics and military infrastructure. Different eras, different enemies, different flags on different battlefields. But the cash flows? Those stay eerily consistent. War is declared. Budgets explode. Contracts land on the same desks. Stock prices jump. Profits surge. The war ends, but the profits don't. The capital is rolled forward into peacetime empires. Foundations, endowments, and philanthropy that all trace back to the same root. Conflict packaged as business. This isn't about a secret cabal in a dark room. It's something simpler, and in some ways darker. Capitalism applied to war. Let's walk through it, dynasty by dynasty, war by war, dollar by dollar. And we start with the family that more than any other helped design the American military-industrial complex before the phrase even existed. The DuPonts. DuPont, gunpowder, plastics, and 220 years of war. If you recognize the name DuPont, it's probably from Teflon, nylon, or some friendly-looking chemical logo on a factory. But the original DuPont fortune wasn't built on kitchen pans and car paint. It was built on gunpowder. Éleuthère-Irénée DuPont arrived from French Revolution around 1800. He was a trained chemist who had worked in French powder mills and saw something the young United States barely understood. Explosives weren't just for war. They were for empire building. Clearing forests, blasting rock for canals and railroads, mining coal and metals, and, whenever necessary, arming soldiers. In 1802, on the Brandywine River in Delaware, he established E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Company. The location was perfect, close to Philadelphia and Washington, powered by water, and just far enough from crowded cities that accidental explosions wouldn't become political scandals. By the War of 1812, DuPont powder was already in U.S. cannons. That first big contract set a pattern that would repeat for 2 centuries. War breaks out. The government scrambles for explosives. DuPont already has the mills, the chemists, the logistics. They scale up, they supply. They make a fortune. The war ends. They keep the plants and quietly wait for the next conflict. The Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848, strengthened that role. DuPont's powder fed artillery and rifles. The contract, about $1 million then, roughly tens of millions of dollars in today's money, was only the beginning. But the true breakthrough came with America's bloodiest conflict, the Civil War. 1861 to 1865, industrial warfare arrived on American soil. The Union Army needed gunpowder in quantities the country had never imagined. Millions of rounds, constant artillery barrages, 4 years of mass mobilization. DuPont's mills ran almost nonstop. They produced over 4 million pounds of gunpowder for the Union. Direct contracts alone were worth over $10 million, something like hundreds of millions in today's dollars. But the public didn't see the balance sheets. They saw headlines about patriotism. The reality was more complicated. The DuPonts were Northern Democrats. Many opposed abolition. Some were sympathetic to the South politically. But their powder flowed overwhelmingly to the Union for one simple reason. That's where the largest, safest contracts were. When the Union won, nuance vanished. DuPont was remembered as a company that helped save the nation. The profits stayed. The contradictions did not. Then came the real turning point. World War I. 1914 to 1918 turned DuPont from a major industrial firm to something closer to a sovereign financial power. Before the U.S. even entered the war in 1917, DuPont was already selling vast quantities of explosives to Britain and France. Black powder, TNT, smokeless powder, and shell propellants. Once America joined the war, production went vertical. New plants went up almost overnight. Thousands of workers were hired. Entire towns were reshaped to feed DuPont's war machine. By some estimates, DuPont supplied around 40% of all explosives used by the Allied forces. The numbers are stunning. 1914 net earnings, around $5 million. 1918 net earnings, roughly $82 million. That's a roughly 1,600% profit increase in 4 years. Over $1 billion in today's terms. And when the guns finally fell silent, DuPont did not give anything back. They did something far smarter. They took that war capital and diversified. Chemicals, plastics, synthetic fibers, nylon, neoprene, freon, countless materials that would define 20th century industry. They built a peacetime empire with wartime money. But they never left the battlefield behind. World War II brought another windfall. DuPont made explosives, nylon for parachutes and ropes, and critically, ran the plutonium production facilities at Hanford as part of the Manhattan Project. The deal structure? Cost-plus contracts. The government covers all costs. DuPont earns a guaranteed profit on top. No risk, no downside, only upside. After Korea, after Vietnam, after the Gulf War, after Iraq, after Afghanistan. The corporate chart changed. Spin-offs, mergers, restructures. But DuPont bloodline companies kept showing up in the supply chain of American war. 6 generations after Eleuthère, the family's trusts still sit on tens of billions in assets. The original foundation? Gunpowder.
Serious, cinematic, documentary tone. If DuPont built America's war engine, the next dynasty fueled it. Literally. Because in the modern world, armies don't move without oil. And no family understood that truth earlier or more ruthlessly than the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers. Oil as the fuel of empire. John D. Rockefeller didn't invent oil, but he invented what oil could become. By the 1870s, Standard Oil was not just a big company, it was the single most important industrial monopoly on Earth. At its peak, it controlled around 90% of the nation's refining capacity. Oil lit America's lamps,
powered its factories, heated its homes. And when militaries moved from coal to oil, Rockefeller's empire quietly became a strategic asset more powerful than many governments. The Spanish-American War, 1898, the first spark. It was a short war, almost a footnote in American history. But it revealed something profound. The U.S. Navy was shifting from coal to oil-fired engines, and Standard Oil was suddenly indispensable. The war lasted months, but its lesson lasted a century. Control the fuel, and you control the war. Rockefeller took note. World War I. The oil age arrived. World War I wasn't just trench warfare. It was the first mechanized war. Tanks, trucks, aircraft, battleships, submarines, all thirsty for fuel. The catch? The Supreme Court had broken up Standard Oil in 1911, but that breakup created a hydra, not a defeat. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, all Rockefeller-controlled successor companies. Together, they still dominated the market. And during the war, they sold fuel to the United States, Britain, France, and through subsidiaries legally insulated from U.S. law, to Germany as well. Fueling both sides wasn't treason, it was business. And it was wildly profitable. John D. Rockefeller became the world's first billionaire, a title earned partly on the backs of armies who burned his fuel while dying in mud and steel. World War II. Profit and contradiction. The pattern repeated. Rockefeller companies supplied the U.S. military with fuel oil, aviation gasoline, lubricants, synthetic materials. Contracts were massive, nearly limitless. And behind the scenes, investigators uncovered that Standard Oil of New Jersey, Exxon's predecessor, had shared patents and technology with IG Farben, the German chemical giant that produced explosives and Zyklon B. Senator Harry Truman led the investigation. He concluded that Standard Oil's wartime dealings had harmed the U.S. war effort. What happened? Nothing. The military needed their fuel. The contracts continued. The profits continued. And when the war ended, the Rockefellers diversified into banking, real estate, universities, and global finance, all funded by decades of war profits. Today, the extended Rockefeller fortune is still valued in the billions. Built on oil, fueled by conflict. The Morgan dynasty, the bankers who profited from both sides. Weapons win battles, fuel moves armies, but money decides wars. And no American family understood that better than the Morgans. J.P. Morgan wasn't just a banker. He was the American financial system distilled into one name. The secret of Morgan power. Wars must be financed. Governments at war will borrow at almost any interest rate because the alternative is losing. The Morgans understood this early. Spanish-American War, 1898. Modest loans, modest profits. But it cemented a relationship. The U.S. government trusted Morgan bankers. And then came World War I, where the Morgan dynasty stepped beyond banking and into geopolitics. World War I, the Morgan War. Between 1914 and 1917, while the U.S. was officially neutral, J.P. Morgan and Company became the exclusive purchasing agent for Britain and France. They effectively controlled Allied war procurement inside the United States. And they did something even more significant. They lent over $2 billion, approximately $50+ billion today, to Britain and France before America joined the war. Meaning, if the Allies lost, they couldn't repay. If they couldn't repay, Morgan banks would collapse. If Morgan collapsed, the U.S. financial system would shatter. So, neutrality was dead long before the first American soldier arrived in Europe. Senator George Norris said it bluntly, "We are about to put the $ sign on the American flag." He was right. America entered the war in 1917. Its financial institutions were saved, and Morgan banks collected massive interest and underwriting fees. After the war, Morgan profits twice. Germany owed reparations. The Allies owed money to America. Nobody could pay. So, Morgan bankers engineered the Dow's Plan in 1924 and the Young Plan in 1929, giant refinancing schemes where U.S. banks lent money to Germany, Germany paid reparations to the Allies repaid their loans to Morgan banks. Morgan collected fees at every step, profiting from the war, profiting from the peace, profiting from the Reconstruction. World War II, same pattern. Underwriting war bonds, financing defense industries, structuring post-war loans, managing Reconstruction capital. By the Cold War era, the Morgan Empire had merged and evolved into J.P. Morgan Chase, but the pattern remained. Wherever nations borrowed, Morgan profited. Today, the family does not control the bank directly, but its wealth, estimated in the tens of billions, was built in part on interest payments from wars that killed tens of millions. Lockheed Martin, the Skyborne dynasty. Weapons manufacturers existed before Lockheed, but Lockheed figured out the formula that would define modern defense contracting. Sell innovation, underbid, overrun, get bailed out, repeat. Their story begins in 1912 when the Lockheed brothers founded a tiny aircraft shop in California. World War I gave them their first taste of military contracts. Nothing huge yet, but just enough to prove a point. Aviation wasn't just the future of travel, it was the future of war. Then came the war that changed everything. Lockheed built the P-38 Lightning, 10,000 plus produced. The Hudson bomber, 2,800 plus produced. Maritime patrol aircraft. Training aircraft. Hundreds of millions in contracts. But Lockheed's real power wasn't the planes, it was the strategy. The Pentagon relationship loop. Hire retired military officers. Place factories in voting districts politicians need to protect. Keep the supply chain spread across dozens of states. This made Lockheed untouchable. Cutting Lockheed contracts meant cutting jobs in multiple states, a career-ending move for any congressperson. The Cold War, the golden age of contracting. Lockheed delivered aircraft that helped define the era. U-2 spy plane, SR-71 Blackbird, C-130 Hercules, F-104 Starfighter. But their signature move was perfecting the cost-plus contract. Underbid the project, once locked in, announce unexpected complications, request additional funding, add years to the project timeline, collect guaranteed profit the whole time. The Pentagon couldn't cancel. Too much money already spent, too many states dependent on the jobs. The modern era, the F-35 money machine. Then came Lockheed Martin after a 1995 mega merger. Their masterpiece? The F-35 program, now the most expensive weapons system in human history. Original cost estimate $233 billion, current projected cost $1.7 trillion. The jets still have hundreds of defects, but Lockheed keeps billing and Congress keeps paying because the jobs are everywhere. Today, Lockheed Martin earns over 90% of its revenue from government contracts. War is not just profitable for Lockheed, it is existential.
Serious, cinematic, documentary tone. If Lockheed built the machines of war, Halliburton built the world they operated in. Airfields, barracks, fuel depots, roads, ports, entire military bases rising from the sand in weeks. Halliburton didn't just serve war, they industrialized it. Halliburton, the company that built the American empire. Founded in 1919 as an oil well cementing company, Halliburton discovered an eternal truth. Where the U.S. military goes, infrastructure must follow. And where infrastructure is needed, contracts flow. By World War II, Halliburton wasn't merely fixing oil wells. They were constructing entire logistical networks for the U.S. military. Their method was simple: no-bid contracts, cost-plus guarantees, political relationships, overseas expansion aligned with U.S. foreign policy. And they didn't just build projects, they built power. Vietnam, the template is revealed. Halliburton's subsidiary, Brown & Root, became legendary during Vietnam. They constructed air bases, highways, ports, barracks, fuel lines, communication centers. Billions in contracts, most of them no bid, justified by the urgency of war. Why Brown & Root? Because one of its founders, George Brown, was a political patron of Lyndon B. Johnson. Johnson rose from Congress to the presidency with heavy financial support from Brown & Root. When LBJ escalated Vietnam, the company that funded him received the lion's share of the military infrastructure boom. Coincidence? History says otherwise. The Gulf War. The Empire returns. During the First Gulf War, 1991, Halliburton built new facilities in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Who approved the contracts? Dick Cheney, then U.S. Secretary of Defense. Who became CEO of Halliburton 4 years later? Dick Cheney. A revolving door so blatant it became a case study in political science textbooks. The War on Terror, a blank check. After 9/11, the U.S. launched 2 long wars, Afghanistan, Iraq. Halliburton, through its subsidiary KBR, became the single most important logistics provider in both theaters. Their tasks included building bases, delivering fuel, operating dining halls, laundry, communications, electrical grids, water systems, prison support facilities, waste management. If a soldier touched it, slept in it, ate it, drove on it, or walked past it, Halliburton probably supplied it. Total contract value from 2003 to 2011, over $40 million. And much of it was no bid, under emergency war authorization. The billions in waste. Government auditors found overcharges, phantom fuel delivery invoices, meals billed but never served, incomplete construction priced as finished, double billing across multiple divisions. Billions were questioned, but almost none of it was clawed back. Halliburton always had the same argument. War zones are chaotic, waste is unavoidable, and the Pentagon always gave the same answer: approved. The revolving door. This is the part that makes the pattern undeniable. Pentagon officers, congressional staff, defense policymakers. Many retired into high-paying positions at Halliburton, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics. The people who approved the contracts were the same people who later benefited from them. Not corrupt, not illegal, just business. Business built on war. The 5 dynasty pattern. The machine that prints war profits. After 150 years, the pattern is as clear as a blueprint. Step 1. Position before war. These companies don't wait for conflict. They prepare capacity, technology, and political connections in advance. So when war begins, the government has only one viable supplier. Step 2. Win the first contract. The U.S. military must move fast. There is no time for bidding. DuPont, Rockefeller companies, Lockheed, Halliburton all became the go-to choice. Once they get the first contract, the rest follow automatically. Step 3. Cost-plus guarantees. A cost-plus contract means every expense is reimbursed, plus guaranteed profit on top. More delays, more profit. More overruns, more profit. More complexity, more profit. Only taxpayers lose. Companies always win. Step 4. Engineering the overrun. Every major weapons or logistics program in the last 70 years has gone wildly over budget. Not because of incompetence, but because that's where the profit lies. Underbid,
win the contract, inflate the costs. The Pentagon cannot cancel because factories are in key voting districts, contracts employ tens of thousands, Congress fears job losses. This is not corruption, it is engineering. Step 5. Capture the regulators. Generals retire into defense companies, defense executives rotate into government. Lobbyists write legislation. Think tank analysts, often funded by defense corporations, publish research encouraging military intervention. This is the influence ecosystem that quietly shapes U.S. foreign policy. Step 6. Lobby for more war. Not openly, subtly. Through white papers, through committee hearings, through security briefings, through campaign donations, through op-eds written by former generals who work for weapons firms. The incentive is simple. War equals contracts. Peace equals no revenue growth. Defense corporations never start wars, but they create the conditions that make wars easier to justify and harder to end. Step 7. Convert war profits into permanent wealth. This is the quiet part. War money becomes universities, real estate empires, hedge funds, trusts, foundations, political dynasties. The DuPonts, the Rockefellers, the Morgans. Their wealth did not vanish when the wars ended. It multiplied. The price tag is $485 billion, taken from taxpayers. Across 150 years, these 5 dynasties extracted $485+ billion in documented war contracts in today's dollars, and closer to $1 trillion when accounting for indirect profits, reacquired assets, and post-war expansions. Every dollar came from workers, small businesses, taxpayers, future generations. A transfer of public money into private empires. The war profit engine still runs today. 2023 U.S. military budget, $816 billion. The top 5 defense contractors received $200+ billion. A quarter of the entire budget. Nothing has changed. Nothing has slowed. The pattern continues. Because it works. The final reveal. The pattern is not a conspiracy. It is a business model. Documented, repeatable, publicly visible. A model that turns every war, necessary or manufactured, justified or misguided, into a private revenue stream. 5 families, 5 industries, 150 years. Same outcome every time. They profit, we pay. Soldiers fight and die. This is not what children learn in school, but it is what history records. The true economy of American war is not just fought on battlefields, it is engineered in boardrooms. And until this engine is confronted, the next war is not a question of if, but when.